everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here and spending your Saturday with us. I hope the information presented today will be beneficial to you, inshallah, for your families, for your communities. As a clinician, I've met with people who were suffering before they came to me, and they were suffering from a mental illness itself, but also suffering again from the shame of having it. Today we're here to talk about breaking the silence, like Brother Najm mentioned, the silence that we perpetuate often without realizing it. This isn't just an academic topic, it's a conversation that requires deep empathy leading to clear action, inshallah. So before we get started, I just want us to reflect. So just take a moment. You don't need to answer it out loud, but just take a moment to reflect with yourself and think about a time you hit a struggle. It could be a personal struggle. It could be a professional struggle, a challenge, a family challenge. And what was the internal voice that told you to stay quiet? That voice is the enemy that we're fighting today. The fear of judgment is the first brick in the wall of silence that we want to break. And we've all gone through it, right? It's something we've all experienced at some point. So this slide here, it shows you numbers. And Brother Najm mentioned some numbers. We're always going to have differences in statistics. But I want you to feel them. So 1 in 5 people, look around this room. That means in this room or in your team or in your immediate family, someone is quietly struggling with depression. So it's a global health crisis. According to organizations such as the National Alliance on Mental Health Illness, NAMI, or Mental Health America, 1.6 billion people affected worldwide. And because we refuse to talk about it, it operates like a silent epidemic, like Brother Najm mentioned. So it's not just a mental health issue, it's a productivity issue, it's a relationship issue, it's a spiritual issue. It impacts every layer of society. And our collective conversation today is the first steps to, inshallah, breaking it. When we talk about the cost of silence, we talk about financials, right? Financials and human costs. Companies love it. We love it. It's important. $1 trillion. That's not a rounding error or anything wrong with that number. It's a loss of cost potential, missed deadlines, untapped motivation that we may experience, all because someone was too afraid to ask for a day off, needing a break, or to be honest about a struggle that they were going through. They felt that they had to keep it to themselves. The next one that shows a 10+ year delay, we're going to go into the next slide and get a little bit more into that, but it shows that research has shown that people wait 10+ years to actually recognize that there is a problem, that they're suffering, and they admit it. So it's a decade of unnecessary suffering where a person could have been thriving, they could have been contributing, right? But instead they're stuck in silence because the stigma felt worse than the illness itself, right? The want to speak up felt scarier. And this is an image that just depicts that. So it's an example, right? So the National Alliance on Mental Health, NAMI, showed that there was an 11-year gap. So the 10+ years, this is reflecting it. 11-year gap between when symptoms begin to finally reaching out for help. So for example, someone is in high school, maybe they start to experience some symptoms. They go through college, they get their first job, they eventually get married, and then they finally reach out for help. So stigma says, don't talk about it. And those are all the years that they have gone through experiencing a struggle. These are some top barriers to care. So the data behind the science, right? Accessing mental health is blocked, right? It's blocked by several interconnected barriers. The stats that you're seeing here are from Kaiser Family Foundation, which they do a lot of research on cost and health insurance and mental health. The most significant obstacle is often financial, and that is because of the high cost of insurance, and insurance companies love loopholes so that they do not cover the actual care that you need, unfortunately. And even when patients can afford care, they are often hindered by severe shortage of qualified professionals. So a lack of psychiatrists or therapists, and then there's long wait times, particularly in underserved regions. And then the systemic issues. So the wanting to handle it alone, feeling shame, feeling embarrassment, doubting treatment, right? Doubting that it will be effective. All of these things together are barriers that prevent people from recovery and wellness. In many communities, especially those with strong cultural and faith backgrounds, depression is often misread as a personal weakness or a lack of faith. And it's not just actually in the Islamic community, it's in many, many faith groups. Many faith groups that I've come across that share the same exact concept. So it's misread as a personal weakness, a lack of faith, and this leads to painful advice from people saying, pray harder, be strong, have patience. And while these are well-intended and they're correct, they sometimes trivialize a serious medical condition and can cause a person to feel a lot of guilt. We must clearly assert that seeking a professional help is not a sign of losing faith. It's not a sign of weakness, but a courageous and responsible action. Simply seeking professional care for a health issue. It's not a character issue. It's a health issue, right? It's not connected to your faith. What is stigma and why it matters? So there's 3 different parts to this. It's not a single problem. I like to say it's a 3-part villain that we have to kind of be aware of. So attitudes. That's the belief that mental illness is a personal choice. It's not a disease, right? That's the moment someone thinks, I'm weak. I can't handle it. Then there's the shame. That's the internal consequence of that attitude. So the fear of being labeled crazy, less than, I'm not capable, right? All of those internal thoughts. And then the discrimination that can come afterwards. So the external action. That could mean losing an opportunity at work, being passed over for a promotion, being left out from social events just because you're not meeting the group's vibe. So stigma turns illness into silence. It stops healing before it starts. And that's where we want to interrupt that process. It's a process that can easily be interrupted if we're just more mindful of the signs, we're more compassionate with one another, and that's what we'll get to here shortly. So stigma, as we've talked about, it wears many faces. The public stigma, the self-stigma, structural stigma, cultural stigma, and then the result. And the result is always the same, is someone delaying care, not reaching out for help when they need it. I want you guys to just take a look at this slide for a minute and just read the examples on there and see if one of them resonates with you. If you've heard of them before, if you've maybe said them before, do they sound pretty familiar? Yeah, they are. It's something that we all do. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. And stigma isn't a diagnosis, right? It's just usually in subtle phrases we hear every day, things that we say to ourselves even, right? It's not even things that we say to others. These are things that we can internalize with ourselves. So she's just being dramatic, just toughen up. These phrases minimize the experience, right? It invalidates the person's pain and it reinforces the silence. First step to breaking that silence is to retire these phrases from our vocabulary, even when it comes to ourselves. So when we think of ourselves in a compassionate manner, we're going to be able to reflect that onto others, being kinder to yourself and having more self-compassion. The human impact. So this slide isn't about statistics. It's about lives and futures that have been diminished. Stigma doesn't just make you sad. It destroys opportunity. It impacts job performance. It leads to burnout. It causes physical health decline because physical conditions damage the body, as I'm sure our doctors are going to go through extensively. And most tragically, when people are isolated, stigma pushes them toward coping mechanisms like self-harm, like substance use. And we need to understand that behind every statistic, there's someone's story, right? This story of pain that only we can stop by being compassionate and by speaking up and being there for them. So this is just a visual to kind of see how things escalate over time, the ripple effect. So the natural path. It's the natural path of depression and really of any untreated mental illness in a culture that is silent, in a culture that doesn't speak up. It starts with a small moment of judgment, internal judgment, right? And then that forces a person into silence and avoidance. They hide the issue from everyone around them, even their immediate family. And hiding the issue leads to isolation. They pull away from their support network. They start to socialize less with their family, with their friends. And that cycle inevitably results in a crisis point. Manageable struggle that could have, have an easy intervention with support, with care, becomes an emergency. And it's too easy. It's not as easy for us to intervene at that point, right? Our goal is to be able to jump into that river as far upstream as possible, possibly at that fear of judgment. If you start to notice your student or your child or yourself even starting to have that internal fear of judgment, that's silent, hop on it, right? Be mindful of yourself. Be mindful of the things you're telling yourself and you're telling others. Okay, so we've talked about all the walls, right? You're like, okay, we get it. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of walls. What do we do about it? So now we want to talk about building bridges, right? How do we build the bridge away from stigma into support? At home, it can look like talking openly about your feelings, right? Not just the positive ones, not just things that make you feel good, not just, hey, did you have a good day at school? No, how was that bad day at school, right? What happened? Give your child the time of day and talk to them about it. In schools, that means training teachers to see a mental health crisis, to see a child that is withdrawing. A lot of the times, we result to disciplinary action, or it's a disciplinary issue. A lot of the times it's not. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the times it isn't, right? It's something else. At work, it means leaders openly using their employee assistant programs. So many companies offer employee assistant programs, which is amazing for you to utilize for yourself or your family. Talk about work-life balance. In faith, it means spiritual leaders collaborating with clinicians, right? We can pray for you, we can support you, we can make dua for you, but we can also link you to a resource. We can link you to a provider. We can link you to a psychiatrist, a therapist, whatever help that you need. Build that bridge, that connection that we need. Small bridges built everywhere dismantle the largest walls of silence, right? It's those small steps that we can each take together. Call to action, 5 ways to replace silence with support. So I don't want you to leave here with just information. I want you to leave with 5 ways you can be an advocate yourself. You don't have to be a mental health professional to be an advocate. We all have a duty, we all have a responsibility that we can do. Talk openly. If you've ever had a migraine, you talk about it or you take medicine, right? We need to talk about depression. We need to talk about anxiety. These are things that we cannot avoid. They are existing. They're existing in our lives, in our families' lives, and we need to talk about it, right? Normalize the struggle because it's there. So the more you avoid it, it doesn't go away. It just grows and grows. Check on one person, okay? One person, you don't need to solve their problem. You don't need to be a problem solver. Just the one text, how are you? And really, how are you, right? Not just, alhamdulillah, good, right? Actually genuinely want to hear what they have to say, because just you listening, right? That's the real answer. That's radical support. Model compassion. So like I said earlier, it starts with self-compassion. Just like we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be merciful to us, we have to be merciful to ourselves and then be merciful to others. So model compassion, show your team that you take a self-care day. Tell your kids, like, today, mama and baba are tired. We're not cooking dinner. We're not doing this. We're going to relax today. Let's have a family day. Let's watch a movie. We don't need to do chores today. Model it. Are things going to build up for that day? Maybe. But just model that if you're not okay, you're recognizing that and you're acting on it, right? Demonstrate that having boundaries in place is not a weakness, it's a strength. So now I'm going to take a break from talking, and you guys are going to talk with each other. So we can't do it alone, right? We can't break the silence alone. So with your neighbors together at your table, I want you to take 2 minutes for a quick discussion, and I want you to brainstorm in your environment. So you can think about your work environment, your home environment, whatever it may look like, and brainstorm a bridge that you can build to overcome the silence. So for example, if it's something, we never talk about it, I'm going to make it a weekly checkpoint that we are going to check in on each other. How are we doing, right? Not just check in, hey, did you get your homework done? Did you do your chores? No, how are you? Let's talk. Rewriting judgment with compassion, okay? So the judgment, this slide is an exercise, okay? It's to rewire your brain. So a little bit of cognitive restructuring. Stigma often starts with a split-second internal judgment, something that, like what we were saying earlier, those everyday examples, things that you say to yourself, we want to be able to catch ourselves doing those things and restructure it, change it. So when you see someone struggling, your old script might say, he's just lazy, he's not doing his work, right? Your new compassionate script needs to reframe that to say, they're struggling with motivation right now. Let me find out why, okay? When you hear someone say, that's all in their head, I don't know what they're talking about, counter that with, their brain is experiencing a real health challenge right now. How can I support them, right? You can't control the stigma that others carry, but you can absolutely control the script that you use inside your own brain, right? If you're mindful of those things, you're mindful of the things that you say to yourselves, you can change it and start to show that in a compassionate way. So I don't want to end with the problem. I want to end with the moment of help. So we focused a lot so much today on the illness, but we forget the outcome. And the outcome is that most people recover and live full, meaningful lives. And it is the incredible, hopeful truth. The cycle of suffering breaks, not when the symptoms disappear, but in the single, small, courageous moment that someone says, I need help, and is met with someone who is understanding and compassionate instead of shame. So healing begins when silence ends. And the great researcher Brene Brown said, what we don't talk about controls us, and what we talk about, we begin to change. So if we replace stigma with compassion, we replace barriers with bridges, together we can end the silence, inshallah. Thank you.